Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's World Discord podcast. I'm your host, Brian Endless.
I'm your host, Joel Ostrow. Hi,
How
Brian.
you doing today, Joel?
I'm here. How you doing?
Good. We're actually taping on Father's Day, so happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day.
This will probably come out a couple weeks afterwards. We're trying to put some episodes in the can, as they say in the industry, and have a few things ready for those inevitable times when we don't feel like taping one in 1 week.
Hopefully this isn't one of those episodes that our viewers would wish we left in the can.
Oh, you're very funny.
No, it'll be a good
All right.
one.
Well, I'd like to thank our loyal viewers for being here. And anybody who's new, please keep following along and spread the word. Today, we are continuing our Who Benefits series, and we are talking about who benefits in the media. The media is something that we shouldn't have to think about who benefits. It's supposed to provide us with the news, but it has been a significant part of the problem since the 1980s. It's been growing since the 1980s. I want to put out a few quotes out here. The first is, he who controls the media controls the minds of the public. No one's actually quite sure who said this first. It was either Noam Chomsky or Jim Morrison in a concert. Some people think it was actually Jim Morrison who said that before Chomsky did.
I hope it was. I'm not a huge fan of Chomsky's.
Okay, good. And then another one, this one's from Allen Ginsberg. Whoever controls the media, the images, controls the culture. We don't often think about how incredibly important this is, but we're supposed to be rational individuals acting in our rational best interests. In order to do that, we need good information. If we don't have good information, we make bad decisions. And if we have good information that's good for other people, they may benefit off of us having bad information. So we're going to talk about how that information is flowing. And just a very quick history on it. This goes back to pre-Ronald Reagan in 81. U.S. media was incredibly different. First, there were only 3 major commercial TV networks, plus PBS and a couple local stations. I think we had UFL, or what was it in Chicago? Channel 32 was always the channel.
WFLD.
FLD.
Talk about that. You know what the FLD stood for?
What was it?
Marshall Field.
That
Also on the Sun-Times.
Interesting. But there were also 1,700 daily newspapers and thousands of local commercial radio stations, large and small, that were independent, that were owned by different groups. And then the landscape started to change in 1987. Reagan withdrew, or Reagan's Federal Communications Commission stopped enforcing the fairness doctrine. And this is one of the most important places in media, because that was the doctrine that was supposed to guarantee that on controversial issues, the various sides of the issue were covered. If you wanted to be considered press, you had to cover those things. And that has gone by the wayside now. And then in terms of ownership, now, while we've got something like 15,000 AM and FM radio stations, they're basically owned by 3 companies. Most of the major media, print media has consolidated. The major broadcast media is going into the hands of a tiny number of billionaires. And that's pretty much describes the problem with our country in a nutshell. Got anything to add, or should we just end it here?
Nope. See ya.
Okay, good.
Well, first, I didn't have this in my notes, but as you were talking, it reminded me. We should consider journalists, people in that profession, as public servants. True journalists, go into that job because they are interested in informing us, so that ultimately we can hold our government accountable. We can demand transparency. We can have a better society. It is an altruistic profession.
It was originally called the Fourth Estate for a long time.
Yep.
That came out of medieval Europe. There were the aristocrats, there were the clergy, there were the commoners, and then there were the press, the Fourth Estate, and the founding fathers picked that up.
And historically, not just in this country, but going into deep history, those who sought to inform about what people in government were doing took on perhaps the most dangerous jobs in society outside of combat military.
Yep.
Investigative journalists, even in this country throughout our history, have faced threats, threats of violence, persecution, despite the Constitution and the laws. Journalists are public servants, and we should thank them for their service as we thank members of the military. I say that not only as one who worked for a couple of years as a journalist, but as one who has lost more friends than I wish to count to the murderous whims of a tyrant. Speaking of Putin, lost many friends in my journalist circle from Russia, which just points to the important role that journalists play, and how important tyrants see that profession and those who work in it. This recognition is nothing new. Our most fatherist of founding fathers, perhaps Thomas Jefferson, has numerous statements, a couple of which I'd like to read, on the importance of information to democracy. The most famous quote attributed to him, he never said, so I'm not going to read it, but he said many things that are analogous to the most famous one. All the way back in 1789, he said, whenever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. He said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never shall be. On democracy, he wrote, an informed citizenry is the only true repository of the public will. And the flip side of that, a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. He was a fierce advocate for and defender of the First Amendment, and particularly the free press provision in it for those reasons. The United States of America is the first place that had a truly free and uninhibited, legally protected free press. But that does not mean that our media was apolitical or neutral or non-politicized. The fact of the matter is, for most of American history, certainly the deep history, the media was deeply politicized. People who founded, whether they were pamphlets or newsletters or newspapers, founded them with political agendas that they wanted followed.
Yeah.
And had editorial policies and employees who would promote those views. That is what we called yellow journalism, the era of yellow journalism. It was raucous. If you think the media in anyone listening to this as a lifetime has ever been rude to an elected official, I suggest you go read some of those newspapers from, say, the 1890s.
Yep. I actually love some of the attacks, and even before the 1890s, the founding fathers, Dolly Madison. Let me see if I can get the quote right. I know that
didn't she have the super zingers?
She did. Yeah, no, exactly. They're very tasty. Not as good as Hostess, though. Dolly Madison, James Madison's wife, during the political campaign, was accused in the newspapers of being a quote unquote whore who
Yes.
sleeps with the people who are opposed to Madison in order to get them to not run.
Correct.
And to stop critiquing him. That was America.
That was America. That was our yellow journalism. And in some ways, it did function as the fourth estate. I found when I was writing about Russia's media in its first competitive election in the early 1990s, I was assigned for a large research project to cover the media and its role in the election. And I described it as a freewheeling, open, largely unrestricted press. And that if a Russian citizen at the time wished to be exposed to any particular view, the entire range of the political spectrum, from Trotskyite communism all the way to ultra nationalist fascism was available to them. The problem was they would have to have subscribed to something like 32 different newspapers to
Right.
get all those views.
Right.
Each one had its own bent. So while there was not censorship or any kind of government regulation or interference with the media was so decentralized and was so politicized that was the landscape. But it
If I can
was a
step in
free
for
press.
1 second here,
Yeah.
something you said is insanely important, and
Mm.
it's the idea that all the information was out there for the
Mm.
Russian people, but they had to get 32
It
newspapers.
was very difficult to get.
If anyone is critiquing this show, the most likely critique, which is true, is that, but all of this information is on the internet. You can find all of the information on all sides out there on the internet. That is a true statement. But first, no human being has the time to do that.
Correct.
And second, only a teeny tiny number of humans even try. We
Yeah.
follow the information that is spoon fed to us, and we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, later, but it's spoon fed to us in very specific algorithms now if we're following it online. So the fact is, our information is self limited in many ways to what we're watching and what we're reading.
It really is. And the more fragmented the information environment becomes, uh, the more difficult it becomes to be certainly an accurately informed, but even fully informed citizen. And that is part of the problem. And there's definitely a paradox today because there is, Brian, as you alluded to, an ultra centralization uh, of media ownership um, in some really unprecedented in our history. Uh, and at the same time, there is a ridiculous fragmentation of information due to the digital age, and we still haven't quite figured out how to have an informed democratic citizenry in the digital era. Let's talk a little bit about the deep history is interesting, but it's less relevant to what's
Yeah.
happening today. I want to focus on the 20th century, which was the heyday of the profession of journalism, journalism that was meant to be unbiased, to present the facts and the truth to the people so that they could form their own judgments. So throughout the 20th century until the last decade, every major city had at least two newspapers, and the few dozen largest cities had three. Those were um, basically mm, every person living in those cities had regular access to them and regularly was exposed to at least one, if not two, of those newspapers. Certainly the educated part of that population, but by the end of the 20th century, we had a universally educated, literate population. Those newspapers were owned by families, and they competed with each other. Those family owners were, for the most part, business moguls, but they were local business moguls. They lived in the communities in which they had become successful business people and in which they owned those news outlets that were informing the people. Um, Typically, two of those newspapers were morning papers and one was an evening paper. In some places, one of those two morning papers owned the evening one, but in the largest cities, there were three competing owners.
So, Joel, hold on for just 1 second here. I want to correct something you said earlier because it's incredibly important. We shouldn't assume that most Americans have literacy skills. You'd mentioned that by the end of the 20th century, almost all of us did. That's an untrue statement. I've been looking into the stats a lot lately, and these are National Center for Education statistics. 21% of US adults are functionally illiterate. That means they are below the fifth grade level. And when you get it to sixth grade level, 54% of adults read it below sixth grade level. we have serious problems with reading.
Yeah, I'm skeptical on some of that, but I also wonder about the distribution of
Yeah,
those
and
that are in.
it's
Like
again
I would imagine they're
distribution's
extremely rural.
distribution's important. It's about
And
two
20%
thirds.
seems high to me, but certainly not in the
It's
cities, though,
we've
right?
been there for a long time. It is more rural. It is more in
Yeah.
red states, and it's about two thirds Native born Americans, and
Uh-huh.
about one third immigrants. So there is some
Okay.
immigration, and English as a second language in there, but it's a
It's still
significant,
significant for
significant number.
sure. Yeah.
Absolutely, and it
Yeah.
includes people like, we've got a big Polish community in Chicago where
Yeah.
not everybody speaks English or speaks
Yeah.
English well in that
Yeah.
community. So those things are there, but this is an important thing to think about.
It is. Um, but getting back to the ownership situation, right?
Yes.
So you had like every major city, and we're talking, 200 cities, all had two newspapers, independently owned, competing with each other, and many had a third evening paper that was yet another owner. Um, they though in every area, one or more of those major newspaper owners also owned local papers. Like the suburban papers, some would be dailies, some would be weeklies, some would be a couple times a week. But
Yep.
but so there was they would own multiple things, but they were very regionally specific. To give you an example, in 1953, 1,300 of the 1,785 daily newspapers were family owned and operated. And the owners lived in or nearby the community served by the paper. And the newspaper's success was tied directly and indirectly to the well being of the community. Hundreds of newspaper publishers around the country, they didn't only compete within a city, but the major papers competed with each other as well for prominence, to be recognized as the newspaper of record, which of course the
Yep.
New York Times has been, but the Washington Post has always been was always considered a paper of record. The Chicago Tribune was for a long
Yep.
time considered a newspaper of record, as was the Los Angeles Times, and there were several others.
Yep.
But then the larger papers in all the cities, they had this friendly competition with each other. They were owned by different people. They were reporting the same news, but they had their own journalists, their own investigators, and were trying to break news. But there are some interesting stories that not relevant to this episode, where they also cooperated with each other as members of the Fourth Estate, committed to holding corrupt or illegal government activities, officials performing illegal activities, to hold them accountable. Most famously, in the publication of the Pentagon Papers, where the Washington Post and the New York Times had each other's back under the threats from the Nixon administration, and then they shared the Ellsberg papers with all of the other major papers around the country to prevent the government from being able to shut down the
And yet,
publication.
what you're talking about, we see none of this now. Just watch a White House press
None.
conference or any press
Mm-mm.
conference that President Trump gives,
Mm-mm.
and it's a bunch of sycophants, just like there are in the cabinet. It's
Right.
not supposed to be what the press does,
Right.
but the administration has made it clear that you're not going to get access if
Right.
you don't do exactly what the White House wants you to do.
Right. So then, in many of the larger cities, alluded to this before, the owners of those larger newspapers would sometimes hold electronic media holdings, radio or television. This was highly regulated by the FCC under regulations against cross media ownership, to try to ensure competition, independence, independence of editorial control. So it was difficult for, say, newspaper owners to get entry into the electronic media market in particular. But in Chicago, the Chicago Tribune, owned by the McCormick family, founded WGN TV. WGN, of course, stood for World's Greatest Newspaper, which is what the Tribune tagged itself. Marshall Field and the Marshall Field Company owned the Chicago Sun-Times, the other major newspaper in Chicago, and had WFLD TV. And this was common, but again, extremely regulated, and there were limits on how many and in what markets they could operate. And then there were the national television networks that would have affiliates in the local cities, CBS, NBC, ABC. They were independently owned, independently operated, and they competed with each other as well. A little bit less on the cooperative side than in the print media, but still collaboratively defending their free press status, and in certain pools like the White House press pool or the Pentagon or State Department congressional pools, journalists from different networks, from different outlets would cooperate with each other to ensure that they weren't getting duped.
Yep.
And even my time working in the Russian State Duma, I was part of a network of journalists, and it wasn't that we were sharing information, but it was verifying that the information we're getting was accurate.
Right.
And it sometimes is how you would get independent multiple source through that kind of cooperation. But anyway, all this began to change. Brian, you know when this all began to change?
The 80s, but when did it change after that?
Well, it really began with 1980. So my father was a labor lawyer.
Your father was responsible for newspapers. Hold it. Your father was responsible for these changes?
No, but he saw them coming. I tagged along with him on a trip to Washington, D.C. in 1980. And as we flew into National Airport, which I refuse to call by its current name, he looked out the window and said, and sort of mumbled, "This is the beginning of the end of our democracy." And I looked at him like he was nuts, and he pointed at the USA Today building. In 1980, Gannett unveiled its evening national paper in glitzy color with very little reporting, called USA Today.
It had a lot of pictures.
In a couple of years, that newspaper had put virtually every evening newspaper out of business, including the Chicago Daily News, which was traumatic in my family because it was a major client of my father's. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying the USA Today had a lot of pictures. They were very pretty.
A lot of pictures and no reporting. They relied almost entirely on wire services. And that put the evening papers out of business around the country. But then CNN, Ted Turner opened up CNN, the cable news network, with 24-hour television news, which further eroded particularly the evening newspapers. This was important because the evening newspapers were training grounds for journalists, both print and electronic. It was sort of they were kind of like the minor leagues for major league papers, and
right.
The local papers did the same things. Like the suburban papers would be feeders to the city papers, and then to television, radio, up the ladder. So his worry was it was going to put papers out of business, which in fact happened, which would decimate the industry, meaning the profession of journalism. And we've also seen that. But Reagan also, as we talked about in prior episodes, right, basically implemented the rise of Reagan brought the rise of more libertarian, neoclassical, capitalist principles, rampant deregulation, including in the media environment, but all across the business environment. Today, there are 5 major media conglomerates. 5 major private equity firms own all of the newspapers. A couple of giants control all of the digital platforms. And since 2005, over 3,200 newspapers have shuttered, have closed their doors, no longer publish. More than 50 million Americans live in a news desert, meaning in an area that is not served by a local newspaper of any kind. 50% of the counties in the United States of America have one or no newspapers. Half
And
of
if it's one, it's often a small, basically local one, if they have it.
or the flip side, it's a small one, but is owned by one of those 5 major
Yeah.
media
Oh,
conglomerates
many of the
that's
local
not
ones are owned by the
reporting
major
locally.
media. Yeah.
Yeah. There are fewer than 700 daily newspapers now, whereas in 2005 there were more than 1,400. It's incredible. The economic consolidation translates to political power. That's a direct quote from a report by the Roosevelt Institute, which does some of the best research on the media environment in the United
Yeah.
States.
And let's be
I'll
clear
pause
on
it
that.
there. Yeah, I'll check.
I brought up the fourth estate before. We talked about it
Mm,
a little bit. The idea behind the fourth estate was it was an additional check on
correct.
power. It was supposed to be checking and providing real information about what the other branches of government, but branches of power were doing. It was not supposed to be a source of power that one or more of them can use. And now it's the powerful owning and using the media.
and and a lot of the, like, if you ask your, I ask my students this all the time. I don't you should try it this coming semester. I just ask, you hear the word journalist, what do you think? And a shocking number of people today will say corrupt or liars or fake or um, and that was a conscious, coordinated, strategic decision by Trump and his MAGA controllers um, to sow distrust in and even hatred towards the media, which is the only entity that could shine a light on the dark machinations that were at the center of their purpose and the whole reason that we're doing these episodes prior on fascism and now on who benefits.
I again want to be careful. This goes way before Trump. This goes back to the 1980s, and
It does.
particularly it goes back to the advent of Fox News and Rupert Murdoch's
Yeah.
Fox News. What they were building that allowed Trump to exist was we started talking with George W. Bush about the post-truth environment,
Mm-hmm.
and that politics wasn't truth anymore. It wasn't about truth. And this is when both sides started believing, you look at Fox News and MAGA and Fox News viewers, they are taught in the national Fox News from morning to night that all of the other media outlets lie. And it is
Mm-hmm.
a central part of their broadcasting. You can't listen to anyone else, they lie. Politicians on that side regurgitate it. Almost everyone on the other side understands that Fox News is lying, and we regurgitate it. By the way, there was an interesting study now. I use this one in class. It's got to be about 10 years ago. It was before the first Trump. And the study was who lies more, Fox or MSNBC? And the answer, they went through and did a detailed analysis. Both of them spin heavily. Fox is really the only major network that
That
makes
lies.
stuff up
Yep.
and that doesn't base it on facts. So MSNBC and several others on the more liberal side absolutely spin from facts and take it in a certain direction. Fox actually makes stuff up. And one of my favorite things about Fox is they're trying to they have convinced, 42% of Americans that CNN is biased. CNN is one of the least biased things I've ever heard. They have one or two biased commentators with nighttime shows.
Yeah.
CNN does 15-second blurbs on nothing 20
Right.
times a day, and
Right.
they have very little bias there. But this has all been built
It.
into the system where we are being taught not to trust the thing that's teaching us not to trust the thing.
Yeah, I'd like to interrupt right there. There are moments when a difference in degree becomes a difference in kind. And since 2015, the outward, explicit violence, violent language against the media in general, against specific journalists, and even calls to violence against them is a different thing altogether. And yes, the Murdoch's intrusion into our media environment and the creation of Fox News really helped to uh, set the stage for that, and it was all purposeful. They wanted this kind of environment,
Yeah.
but it is different now. It is a much more dangerous, much more hostile environment for
No,
journalism. Okay.
absolutely. And I don't disagree at all that the degree has gotten worse. I'm just saying MAGA doesn't exist in a vacuum. Trump doesn't exist in a
Yeah.
vacuum. This had been building up for a while. What was the year, do you remember, when the Fox News had the court case? Someone sued them saying that, the news should be broadcasting things that are more objective, and Fox lied. And the Fox executives went into the courtroom and literally said, yeah, we lied. We're entertainment. Why do you think we'd be telling the truth? Is there any law
This
saying
wasn't
we
the
have to tell
thing
the
about
truth?
the voting machines, the Dominion, where they
It
lost a
might have
billion
been. I'm not.
dollars.
I don't remember what the direct nature of the court
I
case
feel
was,
like
but
it was earlier than that. But yeah,
yeah.
and the I don't want to call them journalists. The the people who leave Fox, the on-air people who then leave Fox, openly admit that they talked about the lies that they were going to
Oh yeah.
share and repeat.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. Can I interrupt with one of my favorite stories that I teach my students about this? So
sure,
of course I can. I'm one of the hosts. So this is a doing
a lesser
research.
one, but one nevertheless.
Oh, thank you very much. You've got that image in the mirror thing going on, I think.
Yeah.
So I teach my students about good research sources. And what I tell them is Fox News, MSNBC are just fine as research sources. You can use them, but you have to assume they're biased. And if something they say doesn't sound right, if it doesn't pass the smell test, you better do your research on it. And I will never forget now, 8, 10 years ago, I had one student where this student quoted something, had a quote in a paper, and it was from Fox News. And I don't discount it just because it's Fox News, but the quote made no sense. And it's just one of those in my head, this is not reality. This doesn't pass the smell test. So I went and I looked at their footnote. And in their footnote, they had gone to a Fox News report and they had quoted it directly and accurately. And it still sounded like it made no sense. So I looked at the source that Fox News had used. And Fox News used a blogger. And then I read what the
Used a
blogger had
what?
wrote, a blogger, a blog. And then I read the blogger site, and the blogger said the exact same thing, warmly quoted. You want to guess what their source was?
Fox
It was,
News.
it was not just Fox News. It was the Fox News report that was quoting the blogger.
Nice.
The blogger quoted the report, quoted the blogger, quoted the report.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it's done. That's
The
how shit's
blogger was probably a Fox News reporter.
entirely possible.
Good Lord.
So that's news, folks. That's where the news comes from.
It will not probably surprise anyone who is watching this to know number one, the consolidation of media ownership. Obviously, it follows a pattern of the consolidation of corporate ownership in every single industry of our economy. The purpose of the consolidation in the media is not just profit, but it is control over the information and the information distribution, so that they can then ultimately control the politics and the policy. In other words, the media is a different industry because of what it does.
Right.
Media is about information, and by controlling information, going back to that Jefferson quote I led with, those corporate moguls can control policy in their own interests.
Yeah. And this is a total 180-degree change from what the media is supposed to be and from what it largely was until the 1980s in the United States. The media
It's a reversion back to the
to the very early
20th century media environment where
because
the
media was
publishers control the information.
Right. It was supposed to provide us with information so that we can make better decisions in that Jeffersonian way and keep control, as opposed to controlling the information and only providing us with the information that lets others control what we're doing. It's insane how important the information is and where you get it and what you believe.
And one thing I find fascinating is the wall between the publishers and the editorial, the newsrooms, is basically gone.
Yeah.
It is gone in print. It is gone in television. You may remember, was it Jon Stewart or was it John Oliver, one of the Johns, many years ago? I can't remember what year it was. I can't remember if it was pre-COVID or post. But they put on a screen a couple hundred news anchors from television stations around the country, all owned by Sinclair, one of the major media moguls. And word for word, they were all saying the same thing. It was all a right-wing message with Trumpian MAGA buzzwords, word for word.
Yep.
And it was demonstrating the elimination of independent editorial control. But that never really caught on, as it were. And maybe what I feel like is caught on today hasn't. But I feel like there's a wider consciousness about the issues at CBS than there are about the same issues at NBC, ABC, and CNN. And people largely, I think, know who the name Barry Weiss. They've heard it. She has been installed by the Ellisons as in control of the news functioning at CBS and all of its affiliates. Yes, sir.
I hold my hand up when I'm waiting for you patiently to finish so I can disagree with you. The idea that people know the name Barry Weiss,
Maybe
or
not.
that people know the owners, no.
They don't know the owners, but they do know what CBS is, and that's what I'm getting at.
Yes, yes.
And it's not because CBS News has been particularly great in recent years. It's not even that 60 Minutes has been the same 60 Minutes that it was a decade and a half or 2 decades ago. I've been critical of it for the last decade, at least ever since Laura, whatever her name is, did that wildly plagiarized and made up report and got. But the thing is, I was thinking about this a lot yesterday, Brian. CBS News, the CBS News division, even for people who haven't been watching it regularly, it still has a certain cachet for people, I think, because of the lasting legacy of Walter Cronkite, even if people aren't aware of it. Even people who didn't watch CBS News felt like they could trust it. And the notion that, there's no independent language coming out of CBS News, and that
Cronkite was
there
the
would be
days
a political thumb on the scale at 60 Minutes. Like, there could be crappy reporting like Laura Loomer or whatever the hell her name was.
Yep.
There can be bad editing, but that was on 60 Minutes. It wasn't on the White House or the FCC or the owners of CBS. That was just oops by the editors and the journalists for failing at their job. And they would then come out and expose themselves. And they did whole segments on how we got this wrong, what we did wrong in getting there, and how we're going to fix it. None of that exists anymore. CBS is an arm of the White House.
Right.
But the thing is so is NBC, so are ABC, and really so are CNN. And the question is the lack of follow-up questioning when they don't get their answers part of the problem of the journalism profession in general that I've been laying out? Meaning, there hasn't been that training and breeding ground step by step from covering the local police beat at the local suburban paper all the way up. A lot of it is more acting and entertainment than it is investigative journalism. And now I want to be careful because I still do value and even more highly value investigative reporters now because it is so hard.
Yeah. I want to
today.
jump in just on the general status of the news because I think you've really clicked on something that is incredibly important. First, I just want to say Walter Cronkite, for those that never heard him, he retired in 1981, was the most respected news broadcaster ever. People believed him when he came into your living room and told you
Yeah.
what was happening. He was as objective as somebody was likely to be on
And that's the
topic.
way it is,
Exactly.
was
He
this
talked about different
tagline.
sides. CBS named itself the most trusted news network because of Cronkite. So it's
Mhm.
hard to say, it's hard to downplay how important he was. Now, to your point, though, I think this has been a problem with journalism really since the 1991 Iraq War, at
For
least,
sure.
and the H.W. Bush administration. And Jon Stewart, we'll go back to Jon Stewart and John Oliver a lot in this because they have great commentaries on the news. Jon Stewart nailed this one. It was one of the presidential conventions in the 2000s. I can't remember which one. He was being interviewed, but this was at the peak of the Daily Show. He was being interviewed at the convention, and the convention interviewer starts talking to him and it's like, now for some reason you are incredibly trusted to provide good news to people and to provide them with what's happening. And Stewart jumps in and says, you know what, I believe that's true, but it's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I remember
I
that.
have a comedy show. I'm
Yeah,
doing
yeah. I'm
comedy.
not news.
Right. If
I'm
you're looking
commenting
at me as
on
the
the
news,
news.
if
Mhm.
they're looking at me as the news, there's something wrong with the news. Then he goes on, though, and he lays out the exact problem that we've had outside of the post truth society in modern journalism, and especially in broadcast journalism. Here's the way an interview goes: the interviewer
Mhm.
comes in, and they've got a talking head from the right and a talking head from the left. And they say, talking head on the right, what do you think about this question?
Mhm.
Talking head on the left, what do you think about this question? Audience, thank you very much for listening. That's
Right.
where we're going to end this.
The
They
false
don't analyze it.
equivalencies. Yeah, and they
They
never
don't
expose
fact
the
check.
false equivalencies. Right.
Exactly. And if they let people say whatever they want to, which is in part why we think our politics is so ridiculous, because it is. And because journalists in broadcast media, at least, let people get away with it. And taking it one more step, the reason they do that is they are afraid they'll be cut out of stories or they'll miss stories if
Well,
they get too
it's
credit.
also a legacy of and misapplication of the principle of equal time,
Absolutely.
because equal time never meant equal time for lies or disinformation.
Right.
Right. The
100%.
facts always, you had to have verifiable sources for the information you were presenting. The equal time is only about electoral politics.
Yeah.
If you have to give equal time to all the candidates,
Yep.
but outside of the, not in news reporting, there's no such
No.
thing as equal time for, right, because then that's like saying, in a news report on a murder, that you have to give equal time to the murderer,
Right. Exactly.
which is insane.
Yep.
um Obviously, the corporate consolidation is even worse in the digital age because we have this problem of digital platforms. And anyone who is a university teacher knows, even though I still subscribe to newspapers and read them digitally, very few people do now. People get their news information, if they get it at all, through these platforms, whether controlled by uh, Zuckerberg at Meta, or by Bezos at Amazon,
Mm.
or by Apple, or by Google, or by
I'm going to say
Musk.
I'm even more old school than you are. It sounds like I subscribe to two print newspapers daily. So
And I
I get
stopped
both
getting the print.
I get the Chicago Tribune and the New
Oh,
York Times, and I was reading the New York Times digitally for a while, and I realized I skip past the important stuff on pages 16 to 20 when I'm reading it digitally. And
that
I
can happen.
really need to have the print paper in front of me to be able to scan and catch the stories that I want to very easily. And that may just be me, but I find I get more content when I have the physical paper, and I'm an oddity on that. Absolutely.
Well, let me interrupt here. It is great and a little archaic of you to subscribe to a print newspaper delivered to your doorstep, but I would make an appeal to, and it's painful because the Tribune certainly used to be a really great newspaper with incredible reporting. But I would urge you to ditch the Tribune in favor of the Sun Times. It is a not-for-profit, wholly owned and run by the journalists and the editors, and their reporting is far superior now. So we should look into that in terms of a local paper.
See, my big issue is the sports page just isn't as good. They only cover the Sox. They don't really cover the Cubs. So.
Yeah, well, the Cubs suck. So, and I can say
By the
that
way,
as a long-time
you need
Cubs
to understand, folks. Joel says that as a Cubs fan.
Yeah, half-hearted. I still hate the Ricketses, but anyway, that's another story.
All right, next.
The tech consolidation is really even worse in so many ways, because Facebook, Meta, Amazon, X, Google, in real ways, they control not just the flow of information and what can be presented on their platforms, they can also control access to it.
Yeah.
So back in the day, nobody could deny your ability to get the New York Times or the Chicago Sun-Times or the New York Post.
Yep.
You would go and buy the Post and you could read what they had. But now if they don't like you, they can deny your access to Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or any of those.
You actually, this is incredibly important. I don't want to underplay this in any way, shape, or form. What you are describing is what we accuse, for instance, the Chinese or North Korean governments of doing, of blocking their citizens' access. But it's not our government doing it. It is illicit power in the hands of billionaires that are able to block our access to information and to news, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it, and we don't even know if they're doing it unless we get lucky.
But it is our government doing it. That's the whole point of these episodes, Brian Endless, my co-host. This is our government. This is our system now.
Informs our government, informs our businesses, informs our businesses. Absolutely.
There's no line between the mega corporations and government. They are the voices in government. They're responsible for putting people in government who are doing what they want.
Regulation is supposed to control things like this. This is where regulation is incredibly important.
And all of this, it's a really good segue. I wanted to quote a passage from a political economist named Eric Peinert. He's at BU. He was formerly at Brown. This is a quote. Tech, communications, media, and service companies have derived so much political influence from their dozens of contact points with federal government. But they're now finding that those same contact points are leveraged for the Trump administration to bring various parts of civil society to heel us. Tech companies have so many intertwined connections in public contracts, such that threats to any one of them can be used as leverage against the entire company. The Washington Post, which used to be, that's my edition, a paper of record with little dependence on the federal government on its own, caved to the Trump administration by reducing its criticism of Trump, removing endorsements of his political opponents. This is because its owner, Jeff Bezos, is far more worried about retaliation against the rest of his economic empire, Amazon, with billions tied up in aerospace and cloud computing government contracts. Amazon backed down from its plan to label tariff costs after a call from Trump, aware of how many other points of leverage the government had over the company. Google, with vast control over American media, communication, and civil society, has multiple government antitrust cases, many public contracts, and possible threat of billions in liability, from the TikTok ban all hanging over its head. It caved with no issue to the most absurd of Trump's decrees, including updating Google Maps to reflect Trump's controversial renaming of landmarks, and on and on and on.
So what you're saying here,
what's that?
What you're saying here is this fits in perfectly with our last group of broadcasts, which was on fascism. You were describing a fascist system in which corporations and the government are like this. Corporations drive the government drives the corporations. You can't tell the difference between the two, and they're all using it to lord power over us.
Vladimir Putin's entire strategy for reconsolidating dictatorial power, which ultimately has led to this war on Ukraine. The first step was attacking the press, murdering journalists, seizing control of assets, and either exiling or bringing under his control the owners of all of the media. Within 2 years, he controlled all the electronic media. MAGA virtually controls all of our electronic media now. And it's purposeful because transparency and accountability by the citizenry to hold government accountable, that's a direct threat to these mega billionaires who want to reference our prior episodes to control the financial industry, to control tax policies so that they are not taxed, to be able to do whatever they want to do.
I just
Robert
had a
Reich
thought
recently
here.
wrote this: if you're a multi-billionaire, you view democracy as a potential threat to your net worth. Control over a significant share of the dwindling number of media outlets enables you to effectively hedge against democracy by suppressing criticism of you and other plutocrats and discouraging any attempt to, for example, tax your wealth.
Absolutely. It's interesting, by the way, thinking about this. I do Come Together Project TikToks and YouTube every day. We do this show every week. I think we'll probably know we're successful when we start
It
getting
bans.
banned.
Yep. Yeah.
That's how you know you're a successful critic.
This stuff's dangerous. Those words of my late father echo in my head. He hated the whole concept of CNN, the turning of news into entertainment, but he also feared the corporate consolidation that Reagan's policies and then the corporate gobbling up of newspapers by fewer and fewer owners. That those worries have definitely been realized, and it is also important to note that with fewer and fewer owners, the ability of authoritarians to control information becomes very easy, as those last quotes suggest. They only needs to control 5 or 6 people now.
Yeah. I want to go back to the beginning, Joel, and this is all about the information that we get.
Yeah.
We can't look at the media as some outside thing. In order to be fully rational, we need as much information as possible. Rationality is making the best choices about what we want, just subjectively best choices about what we want. But if we don't have good information, we don't make good choices. It's often called the garbage out, garbage in, garbage out problem. And they purposefully, media, the plutocrats, the government, are purposefully trying to control and limit the information we get.
Correct.
To information that is beneficial of them, and to take out information that is critical to them. And if we don't have the information, it's hard for us to even tell when they're doing it. And it is insidious the way it has gone into and changed our society.
Professional journalists are enemies, to borrow Trump's word, who borrowed Stalin's word, of only one thing. They're enemies of those who want to harm us.
Sadly, I think that's too good a place to end.
It is.
Excellent. Not even going to ask you for last words. You just had them. So, folks, if you're depressed right now, just
wait till next time on the World Discord Podcast.
Excellent.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
This has been the World Discord Podcast. We've just got 1 or 2 episodes of Who Benefits left after this, and then we'll have to think about what we're going to do next. I'd like to thank you, the listeners. I'd like to thank David for producing, and we will see you all soon.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye, all.